Coming up next, Mega Man X, specifically Mega Man X1 through 4. What made this series so memorable, and why did it drop off so hard? Let's talk about Mega Man X. Not to be confused with your standard vanilla innocent Mega Boy classic, or his very adult counterpart Mega Man XXX, where his Buster Gun is probably his wiener or something. Mega Man X sat somewhere in the middle and was designed to appeal to kids who grew up with classic Mega Man and were now a bunch of teens. Teens that liked rock and roll and saying hard things like, damn.
Where's that damn fourth Chaos Emerald?
There were 8 games in the X series, and a few spin-off games as well, making it a reasonably popular series at the time. Frankly, it's a crime against humanity that the last mainline entry to the franchise was a whole 20 years ago. Help me, Keiji Inafune, you're our only hope. Hype for the series is still alive though, likely helped by Capcom releasing modern ports of their various Mega Man series, with the X series bundled together in 2006 and 2017. Which is great because it's an amazing series, and I'd sell my left nut for Mega Man X9. I don't know why anyone would want to buy a single nut, but the offer's on the table. You could use it as a punching bag for all I care. But the cold hard reality is that this series is likely dead. Deader than Disco, deader than Clifford the Big Red Dog after he ate a giant chocolate bar. He's Clifford the Big Dead Dog. So rather than hoping for the future, let's spend some time appreciating the past. This is the Mega Man X series retrospective.
No, this isn't happening! There's no reason for me to go on. What? What am I fighting for?
Don't get too comfortable. This is a dangerous situation.
I thought the car was supposed to move us. Wouldn't that be nice?
Can it? Ready, steady, ready, steady, ready, steady.
Mega Man, can you hear me?
This is Snake. Kept you waiting, huh? Are you familiar with Big Chunk?
A scattered dream is like a far-off memory.
Gotta give it my all. Hope you're ready. We can't save the world from a CD player.
Regardless of the name, X and the original Mega Man are 2 different characters, despite 8-year-old Wes being adamant that they were one and the same and refusing to believe that the original Mega Man was freaking dead. Both were created by Dr. Light, a brilliant scientist who somehow made the most advanced robots ever, despite spending all of his free time day drinking.
You must recover all the energy immediately, Mega Man.
But where is Dr. Wily?
That's a good question. We may be able to locate another energy emission from the radar room. When we find that meteor, we'll find Dr. Wily.
X was the first robot ever created with free will. Dr. Light was like, whoops, maybe I shouldn't have done that, and proceeds to lock X away in a capsule so he could safely test his decision-making skills. 100 years pass, and X is found by another scientist named Dr. Kane, who was so fascinated by X's free will that he decides to copy that technology and use it in his own line of robot creations. He calls these free will bots reploids and mass produces them. It doesn't take very long though before many of them decide to revolt against humanity. These renegade reploids are called Mavericks. Some of these reploids go Maverick due to a glitch in their system, and some of them simply choose violence. And you know what? If I were designed to look like a sunflower, I might want to burn down a city too. So, the overarching story of the series is simply that X needs to stop these Mavericks and save mankind. Helping X is his fellow Maverick Hunter, Zero, who Mega Man creator Keiji Inafune wanted to be the main character initially, but that idea was shot down by Capcom. Slow your roll, hotshot. You only made one of the most iconic and recognizable characters in all video gamedom. Why should we trust that you'd be able to do it a second time? No, make it about Mega Man, and you could put Zero in as an advisor character, like Roy Campbell from Metal Gear, or Wilson from Home Improvement. The main antagonist and leader of the Mavericks is Mark Cuban. Wait, that can't be right. Sigma. I wonder if Sigma is related to Ligma. Ligma balls!
Got him!
Sigma is a real slippery son of a bitch who just will not die.
Why won't you die?
He was originally created by Dr. Kane to stop the Mavericks, but of course ends up defecting and leading the Maverick cause instead. By this point in the story, Dr. Kane has single-handedly manufactured the greatest threats to humanity, and somehow isn't locked up in some secret offshore prison. I mean, what's it gonna take to revoke this dude's military contract? Jeez. Like the original series, you play through 8 levels, with each level ending in a boss fight, and once you beat the boss, you'll gain their special power. Once all 8 bosses are defeated, a final level will unlock where you'll go through the ringer, taking on all the cumulative challenges faced up till that point, including refighting 8 bosses again, ultimately climaxing with a final, multi-formed boss battle against Sigma. I hope you like this formula, baby, because it is the only one you'll be getting. Now that we've covered the basics, let's dive into the first game. While in development, this game was called Super Rockman, continuing the SNES's famous title gimmick like Super Star Wars, or Super Castlevania, or Balls. Anyways, it was eventually renamed to Rockman X. This caused some confusion with gamers at the time, thinking that X stood for the number 10. Like, wait, Mega Man 5, 6, then 10? Huh? Like I mentioned earlier, X was designed for a slightly more mature audience. Classic Mega Man had very round and cartoony features. His design was inspired by Astro Boy after all. X, on the other hand, was taller and older looking, with more emphasis on his armor and weaponry. The box art for X1 was the first time a lot of us ever saw him, and in his ultimate armor, which you could unlock in the game, he kinda looks like a Gundam wing. This was a pretty radical departure from what fans were expecting at the time. A big change in his design came from the upgrade from the NES to the SNES. With more colors and pixels to work with, the designers had a lot more options than just blue, white, and black. Designer Hyoto Kaji said that the freedom the SNES allowed made it hard to pin down a look, because the sky was the limit. White gloves, a ruby headpiece, and other details were added with the new SNES sprites in mind. The instruction manual for the game goes into greater detail about how Dr. Kane discovered X. It's little lore-building oddities like this we just don't see in modern games anymore. Well, except for Palpatine's resurrection happening in Fortnite.
The great error is corrected. The day of victory is at hand. The day of revenge.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
Actually, you know what? How about we don't do this and we just keep the story in the game, you know? Anyways, the long and short of it is that Dr. Kane discovered X in the ruins of Dr. Light's lab and was amazed to discover that X was capable of thinking and making his own decisions. After creating reploids based on X's design, it only takes a few months before the first instances of Maverick behavior starts to surface. Sigma is assigned to head the newly formed Maverick Hunters, but sure enough, he goes Maverick too. Kane says that most of the human population is in hiding due to Sigma's attacks, and I think it's an interesting bit of dialogue because the X series does very little in actually giving us context or information about what the humans are up to, like, ever. Even in X5, when, spoiler alert, most of humanity is wiped out, we literally never see a human being reacting to any of it. This little story in the manual isn't much, but it does give a little bit of background at least. Fun fact, Sigma's symbol is the Greek symbol for Sigma, but it was originally going to be a cobra, with a mount making the shape of a W, alluding to a connection with Dr. Wily. If you look closely, you could see it. X1 begins with this fractured highway stage that serves as a good warm-up for the rest of the game. I can easily say that I've played this specific level more than any other in video games, both from repeated playthroughs of X1 and all the times I'd test out controls on a SNES emulator by loading this game first. And it is indeed a good level. I mean, if this music doesn't get you pumped, I don't know what will. Speaking of which, the soundtrack for Mega Man X is just amazing. I don't think there's a single track I don't like, and all these years later I could hum or whistle each stage theme without really having to think that hard. That's a good sign of a memorable soundtrack. The actual sound quality is definitely handicapped by the limits of the Super Nintendo, with a lot of the music sounding really tinny and compressed, but hey, that's just how it was in the early 90s. Great soundtrack regardless. The opening stage ends with an unwinnable boss fight against Vile, also known as Purple Boba Fett, who's a henchman for Sigma. I'm sure many others, like myself, tried in vain to beat him without realizing he's invincible. Fortunately, Zero swoops in to save the day. X laments that he isn't strong enough to fight Sigma, and Zero gives him some encouraging words. There's very little story in the first X game, but this scene does show us a little of X and Zero's friendship. The 8 Maverick bosses in the first game are iconic and easily my favorite lineup. You've got such classics as Electric Monkey, Slippery Penguin, and Out of Touch Old Son of a Bitch. I have a monopoly on all the housing and jobs in this town, and I'll make sure that no one is paid more than slave wages. But you know why these young reploids are really going Maverick? Because they keep buying coffee and avocado toast. Okay, Boomer. Also, apparently there was going to be a Chimera-looking Maverick, as we could see in this beta footage, but that's the only reference we have to it. What is that, a Maverick or my ex-wife? While you can play any stage in whatever order you want, there is an ideal order, as fans of the original series are well aware. Each boss doesn't just give you their special weapon, they're also weak against one of those weapons. Chill Penguin is weak against Flame Mammoth's weapon, Spark Mandrill is weak against Chill Penguins, etc, etc. This is basically an automatic easy mode for those players that choose to use them. The Mavericks are so crippled by their weaknesses that the fights are almost impossible to lose. I like that this is added as a way for less skilled players to still be able to enjoy the game, but maybe a middle ground would have been that they take less damage so that you could still have an actual fight. I mean, look at this shit. There's no sport in this. The special weapons include the Boomerang Cutter, the Chameleon Sting, the Electric Spark, the Fire Wave, the Homing Torpedo, the Rolling Shield, the Shotgun Ice, and the Storm Tornado. Personally, I rarely use the secondary weapons in Mega Man games because I find that half the time they're not really worth the effort, and the limited uses puts unneeded pressure on me to conserve ammo, so I just don't bother. That being said, I do really like how useful the Storm Tornado is for taking out multiple enemies. The Homing Torpedo is useful too for out-of-reach enemies. The Shotgun Ice and Rolling Shield do so little damage that they're basically worthless though. One last detail that I want to mention is that certain attacks will have a unique effect on the Mavericks despite not being their direct weakness. For example, Launch Octopus's direct weakness is supposed to be the Rolling Shield weapon, but if you use the Boomerang Cutter, it will chop off his freaking arms.
It is but a scratch. A scratch? Your arm's off. No, it isn't. Well, what's that then? I've had worse.
I don't even feel good about this fight anymore, it just feels wrong fighting a torso. It'll also cut off Flame Mammoth's trunk, John Wayne Bobbitt style. An interesting detail about the stages is that their design changes depending on the order you fight the Mavericks. If you beat Chill Penguin first, then Flame Mammoth stage will be frozen over. If you beat Launch Octopus, then Sting Chameleon stage will be flooded. My favorite is defeating Storm Eagle. The ship you fight him on will crash into Spark Mandrill stage, cutting the power to the building. These changes are a fun addition that gives a little bit more story and immersion in a world that's otherwise not particularly fleshed out. While the stages are relatively linear, there's a fair amount of hidden things to discover, making each playthrough a little different. There's this underwater dragon boss you could fight, or this forest robot. The stages have a lot of verticality to them too, especially Storm Eagle's. It makes you feel like there's multiple ways of going about things, rather than just running down a line. I think X1 easily has some of the best stages, with plenty of enemy variety, challenge, and nuance to keep the player engaged. There are definitely stages I like more in later games, but the later Mega Man X games would lean hard into gimmicks to keep things interesting, at the expense of sacrificing core gameplay. X1 keeps things simple and is constantly challenging the player to use the skills they've learned along the way, rather than tossing curveballs at them. To make X's journey a little smoother, he'll get power upgrades via hidden capsules littered throughout the game, left for him by Dr. Light. Aw, that's nice of him. Dr. Light has long since passed, but he did go through the effort of hiding capsules with upgrades and holograms inside them, and scattering these capsules in multiple locations all throughout the world. How he managed to pull that off is beyond me, and how X was the first and only person in 100 years to discover them is also beyond me. Kenji Unifune explained that due to role-playing games becoming more popular, he wanted to incorporate certain RPG elements within Mega Man, and that led to the upgradable armor idea that would continue for the remainder of the series. These upgrades let him dash, increase his defense, and more. The dash would pretty much become a standard move from that point on, and hopefully you're playing this game on a version that allows button remapping. Otherwise, your hand will be the mayor of Cramp City. You thought a Charlie horse in the deep end of the swimming pool was bad? Just wait till you try to play a Mega Man X game with dash on the A button. Here's a little anecdote about the wall jump that nobody asked for. According to Unifune, the development of X1 was hell, with the planning team taking forever to communicate with the developers. Team members would play games all day, and some would even leave work to go bet on horse races or gamble at the casino. Inafune was so frustrated, he decided to incorporate kicking a wall into the game's mechanics. Whether this was truly his inspiration for the wall kick, I don't know, but hey, that's from the man himself. Personally, the wall jump is probably the main reason I have no desire to go back and replay any of the original Mega Man games. Classic Mega Man always felt very grounded to me, and by that, I mean he felt very heavy and clunky to control. With the wall jump, X can achieve a level of movement and flexibility that classic Mega Man never could, and in turn, he's way more fun to play as. I love you, classic Mega Man, but you're no match for the overly caffeinated X, hopping off the walls like friggin' Spider-Man. The Buster upgrade will allow you to charge your secondary weapon, which will unleash a whole new move. For example, charging the Chameleon Sting will give X temporary invincibility, and charging the Shotgun Ice will create a cute little ice block that X could use as a toboggan. Yeah, Shotgun Ice still sucks. In a few stages, you'll find Ride Armor, which is a giant mech suit X can get into and ride around. The Ride Armor can dash, punch, and jump, and the armor absorbs any damage that would have been meant for X. Kenji Inafune said that for the X series, he wanted a sense of style and luxury that wasn't possible on the NES, and he wanted the Ride Armor to exemplify that. While it's not exactly a Gundam Wing, more like a Rock'em Sock'em robot, actually, it is definitely a cool addition and mixes up the gameplay a bit. Also hidden throughout the 8 stages are heart canisters that increase your max health, and sub-tanks that let you store extra health. But the real secret of this game is Mega Man getting access to the Hadouken move from Street Fighter. I won't list all the requirements here, but believe me when I say it's very tedious, and actually requires you to throw yourself off a cliff multiple times. Only in death can we truly be free! The Hadouken is pretty sweet though, as it one-hit kills any enemy, including bosses. It's pretty funny listening to Sigma giving a speech about how he's all-powerful, and hyping you up for this epic fight, and then instantly killing him in 1 second. Hadouken! NANI? Speaking of the Sigma fight, it's pretty dang difficult without cheating, as he has this sick-ass lightsaber and a big attack radius. In fact, the whole game can be pretty challenging, but not in a cheap way. The enemy placement and difficulty is perfectly balanced, except for Sigma Fortress 1, this part. Challenging but fair is a good summation of the first Mega Man X game, but unfortunately, it's the only entry in the series I'll be able to say that about. But we'll get into that later.
Why are we still here? Just to suffer?
Anyways, before the Sigma fight, Vile reappears and challenges X, and Zero sacrifices himself to weaken Vile enough for X to finish him off. Zero dies, and it's a shame that we've barely gotten to know him at all, but I mean, he's a robot, he'll probably be fine. X faces off against Sigma's second form, a giant wolf mech, and this boss fight is no joke. Not the hardest fight in the series, but it's definitely a doozy. After a few well-placed shots, Sigma is finally down for the count. X has come a long way from the beginning of the story, when he was just a rookie Maverick Hunter getting his ass beat by Vile. He gives Sigma's defeat a lot more weight and satisfaction to it. Sigma promises to usher in a new age of reploid dominance, and that he'll return someday to get revenge on X. Mega Man watches from a nearby cliff as Sigma's fortress crumbles into the sea. He has sort of an existential crisis about having to kill so many of his fellow reploids, but don't worry, less than a year later he'll be back in Mega Man X2 to kill some more. When Mega Man X was first released in 1993 and 94, it sold really well, over 1 million copies within 7 years, and it got rave reviews from critics. It was considered the breath of new life the Mega Man series needed after years of the same old thing on the NES. X1 just feels so good to play. It's perfectly balanced, with just the right amount of challenge. The story is simple but effective, the music is excellent, just an all-around great game, and it's definitely earned its place in video game history.
More 一人のヒーロー、ロックマン X、スーパーファミコンで新登場。君はまだ X を知らない。カプコン。
I'm gonna go a little out of order here to talk about a game that came out much later, but fits here because it is in fact a remake of the first Mega Man X game. Maverick Hunter X came out in 2005 in Japan and 2006 in the US. It's a game I was super excited about at the time, and not a lot of people were expecting it to be made, especially not on the Sony PSP of all things. Apparently, Kenji Inafune was between making this game and X9, and that was the last time X9 was really ever brought up. But in fairness, Maverick Hunter X was a pretty solid game, even if I would have preferred X9. Mega Man is in 3D this time, with extra flourishes like 2D anime artwork. This game came out around the same time as X8, so the character designs are pretty similar. There's also full voice acting this time around. Each boss has a conversation with X before their fight, which further fleshes out everyone's story in a way that simply wasn't possible in the original.
Chill, Penguin. Why have you sided with Sigma?
Sigma has paid for the use of my power. Working for him is a million times better than piddling around on a South Pole with nothing to do.
Interestingly, the boss fights have completely separate dialogue in hard mode, which, by the way, there's a hard mode you could unlock after beating the game once. X's dialogue is, appropriately, a lot more hardened as well.
Spark Mandrill, do us both a favor and surrender peacefully.
In hard mode, the bosses all have a slightly varied attack pattern too, which I really appreciate. Most hard modes in games just go the lazy route and half your HP or double the enemies, which, yeah, that's harder in the same way that playing chess against someone while a monkey is attacking your face is harder than if it wasn't there, but that's not really what I want from a hard mode in chess, you know? On a side note, the Maverick virus has worked in different ways throughout the X series. Sometimes it's a corrupting influence, like the One Ring bringing out everyone's worst impulses. Sometimes it completely hijacks a reploid and makes them do its bidding. And sometimes it's more of a slight push that a rebellious reploid needs into going down an evil path they were already leaning towards. Storm Eagle seems to be going Maverick out of his own free will, but has a bit of shame about it. Launch Octopus seems like a narcissist that was already leaning towards evil anyways. And Armored Armadillo acts like he has no control of his decisions. The different ways the Maverick virus affects reploids has always intrigued me, and so it's really cool to get more insight into the boss characters through these conversations. One way I think these conversations are really effective is during the boss rush at the end of the game. In the original game, you just fight all 8 Mavericks again without any real explanation. This time, X comments how Sigma basically brought them back to life as mindless zombies. It's a little touch, but it adds a lot to the story. The 8 Mavericks chose to follow Sigma originally, and were each in charge of defending a key location for Sigma's world domination plot. They all gave their lives to fight for their master, but in the end, they're just tools to be used and disposed of. And being brought back as zombies just to weaken X really shows what a cold bastard Sigma is. So not only does the extra bit of dialogue here justify why there's a boss rush, but it fleshes out Sigma's character as well. Good job, Maverick Hunter X. A fully animated OVA called The Day of Sigma was included in the game. It was made by Xebec, the same studio that made the anime cutscenes for Mega Man 8, X4, the NT Warrior anime series, and the Star Force anime series. Day of Sigma basically establishes Sigma's time as a Maverick Hunter and his defection, setting up the events of the game. There's not really any revelations here, but it is cool seeing some of this background story played out rather than glossed over with a few lines of text. It's also really interesting seeing Chill Penguin and others working along with Maverick Hunters before their rebellion.
Storm Eagle, I thought you were supposed to be patrolling the missile base.
With the automated defense system complete, they trimmed down my tour of duty. Starting today, I'm just a regular hunter again.
No! Third person, no!
Mark Gatha and Lucas Gilbertson voiced X and Zero respectively in X8, and they returned here to lend their talents. I gotta say, it's sad that it took Capcom this long to find the perfect X and Zero voice actors. These guys sound exactly like how X and Zero were always supposed to sound.
Strange. It's too quiet.
Want to check it out, X?
The stages are pretty faithful recreations, and it's great seeing all the extra details we could only imagine before, like distant cars on the highway in the opening stage. The game does mix things up a little by changing where the armor parts are and by adding a few extra locations in the stages that weren't there before. The biggest change is the Sigma Fortress stages. They're completely different, not just in the design, but also rather than having a boss rush mode, the 8 Mavericks are stretched out across all 4 stages. You'll also fight Vile and the other Fortress bosses in a different order. If you've ever played Mega Man X as many times as I have, It's really trippy getting to Sigma's fortress and seeing things remixed and moved around so dramatically. Technically, all the text in the game is rewritten, though it does maintain the spirit of the original script. Here's the opening stage where X and Zero fight Vile in the original versus the Maverick Hunter X version.
You underestimated me. I hate that about you. X, there's nothing you can do. I'll defeat you and Sigma. Then I'll change the world.
X, are you alright?
Zero.
The soundtrack is a remix of the original score. I'm on the fence with this one, because I love X1's OST so much that changing it seems like blasphemy. But Maverick Hunter X did a pretty good job. The biggest get for Maverick Hunter X is the unlockable Vile mode. Inafune mentioned that everyone would have been expecting a Zero mode for an X1 remake, so he went with Vile specifically to subvert expectations. We got a regular freaking Ryan Johnson over here. Vile mode is a pretty impressive feat. They could have just slapped a model-swapped X into the game and called it a day, but Capcom really went above and beyond. Vile controls fundamentally different than X, and it takes a long time to get used to. Vile has its own unique dialogues with each of the Mavericks, too.
You don't respect authority, you don't follow orders. I pity you.
Pity? Don't pity me! You don't know anything about me!
And he even gets his own anime cutscenes that establish what he's been up to while X and Zero were off doing their thing in the main storyline. Not only that, but all the stages have completely different enemy placements to create a brand new challenge for the player. That's pretty impressive. The rub here is that Vile mode sucks ass, and I'll tell you 2 reasons why. 1, controlling Vile just doesn't feel good at all. His main attack is really weak, his other attacks are super cumbersome to use. I don't know, there's just no flow to it. The second, and really more important reason, is that for some godforsaken reason, Capcom decided to replace the stage theme for every single level with Vile's theme song. Literally the entire game, you'll be hearing the same song on a loop, and the song kinda sucks.
I'm ready to give it a shot. I'll show you how strong I am. I'll show you how strong I am. I'll show you how strong I am. I'll show you how strong I am.
The silver lining here is that the final battle is against both X and Zero, who work in tandem with each other, doing cute little team-up moves, which is adorable. Maverick Hunter X was pretty faithful to the original, except for some things like killing off Dr. Kane for some reason, but otherwise, it didn't change too much. Technically, this was going to be a soft remake of the series, so who knows what else they would have changed story-wise in future titles. The controls and gameplay are tight, and it was a lot of fun replaying these stages in 3D, even if it is a really basic PSP quality 3D. Unfortunately, when Maverick Hunter X was released in 2005 and 2006, it bombed hard, worse than me trying stand-up. I went to a pride parade the other day. I've never seen so many fierce lions before.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
I don't know why exactly it didn't sell well. It could be that the PSP sales in general were dwindling. It could be that gamers would have preferred a handheld Mega Man on a Nintendo console instead. Who knows? Because the game sold so bad, Capcom decided to scrap any future remakes, which is a real shame. So, Maverick Hunter X stands alone as this weird experiment that didn't really go anywhere, which is a shame because it's pretty excellent, all things considered. Set 6 months after the events of the first game, X is now the leader of the Maverick Hunters and is heading an assault on a production factory where a Maverick uprising is fomenting. Hey X, check it out, I'm popping a wheelie! I'm popping a wheelie! Oh my god, who could have possibly tipped off the Mavericks that their factory was going to be assaulted, besides this front-page newspaper story found in the game's instruction manual explicitly spoiling what the Maverick Hunter's plans were. This extra pun was absolutely designed for lame dads like me. Give me more of that ridiculous cheesy nonsense, Capcom, please. Fun fact, the giant purple robot you fight in the intro stage was made to look like co-designer Yoshihiro Suda. I could definitely see the resemblance. X is back to murder some more of his reploid brothers, like this cucumber one, or Mr. Krabs, or this alligator. Come at me in the comments section, Florida people, I dare you. Additionally, there's a reindeer, bug, and this ostrich with an interesting neck design. Like I said, the development time for this game was less than a year, meaning the developers must have been pretty rushed, and it shows in some areas. Like, the final level is just Magna Centipede's level again, even though it's shown to be a separate location on the map. That doesn't make any sense. Sigma's fortress in the middle of the North Pole just happens to have a replica Magna Centipede area in it. Why? Other ways the game feels rushed is its lack of creativity. There's a few new ideas thrown in, but mostly it's just the same exact game, but with new stages and less interesting bosses. I mean, I guess you could say every Mega Man game is formulaic, but that's fine if the bosses and stages are actually good. I remember liking X2 as a kid, but after playing it off the heels of the original, its flaws are pretty glaring. It's just kind of a forgettable, uncreative sequel that doesn't add much, and ultimately makes no difference on the overall story, save for one thing. In X2, X has to fight a newly formed group called the X Hunters, who, naturally, were formed by Sigma to hunt X. They consist of Surges, Agile, and Violin. Surges is a rough French translation of wisdom, Violin roughly means violent, and Agile means, well, agile. So you have Violent Guy, Agile Guy, and Wise Guy.
Oh, a wise guy, huh?
Originally, for the first game, the idea for the main antagonist were these three figures, but eventually they were amalgamated into Sigma. For X2, the concept of tall dude, short dude, fat dude was repurposed for the X Hunters. According to Inafune, the original plan was to round out the team with a female member and call them the Four Guardians, but the female member was scrapped for time. Sorry girls, maybe next time. They assembled Zero's remains and rebuilt him to fight the player, but of course that backfires and Zero ends up right as rain by the end of the game. So besides Zero being alive again, you could pretty much jump to X3 and nothing else would change. According to the game's designer, Yoshihiro Suda, Kenji Inafune walked into the office one day and said, "Hey, wouldn't it suck if Zero stayed dead? Let's bring him back to life." And that was that. Get used to Zero heroically sacrificing himself, only to be brought back to life shortly after. It's going to become a theme in the series. The game isn't all bad though. The X-Hunter bosses being randomly shuffled into different levels as sub-bosses made things more interesting. And certain upgrades, like the mid-air dash, really make you wonder how you ever lived without it. I love you, mid-air dash. Marry me. Also, best improvement of all, the explosions are blue now, guys. Let's talk about the special weapons. There's the Bubble Splash, the Crystal Hunter, the Magnet Mine, the Silk Shot, the Sonic Slicer, the Speed Burner, the Spin Wheel, and the Strike Chain. Some of these weapons are cool, like the Speed Burner or the Spin Wheel, but others, not so much. The Strike Chain is a cool idea in theory. I mean, who doesn't want a grappling hook like the freaking Batman? The problem is that its range is so short that you'll almost certainly never use it, even once.
Not once!
Is your Strike Chain not long enough? Does your partner laugh right at your face and ask if it's really extended all the way? Well, then you may want to order some HIMS, which of course stands for Here is More Strike Chain. And if the short reach of the Strike Chain doesn't make you feel like less of a man, the Bubble Shot certainly will kill any confidence you have left. X is supposed to be an advanced fighting Reploid. Why is he blowing bubbles? This isn't a 3-year-old's birthday party. Nintendo was really horny to show off their new CX4 chip that they were developing for Super Nintendo games, so Capcom made sure to make good use of it. The final fight with Sigma has you challenging a 3D wireframe, which, at the time, probably made people crap their pants in amazement. Truthfully though, the CX4 chip wasn't very impressive, but Nintendo was pushing hard on Capcom to use it, even insisting on having weekly meetings about how to implement it. A lot of the game's advertising even promoted the amazing 3D graphics it could render. According to the developers, the CX4 chip was a huge pain to work with, so it would only ever get used in Mega Man X2 and X3 cartridges. To think, we could have had a more polished game if Capcom hadn't wasted their time making this admittedly sick-ass spinning logo. But that wasn't the only issue during development. Many team members from the first game went on to work other projects, and their roles were filled with a lot of inexperienced employees. According to an interview with game planner Sho Suge, work was constantly being delayed by the planning department, which meant that the character and software teams often had nothing to work on. This led to many of the developers playing an obsessive amount of Puyo Puyo while they waited for planning. X2 officially established Sigma's true nature as a computer virus, thus his ability to survive and merely adapt to new bodies throughout the series. You can't kill me, I'm a ghost, basically. Sigma also hints that Zero was originally created by Dr. Wily, which was later confirmed in Mega Man 2: The Power Fighters. This storyline gets touched on more later in the series, so we'll be coming back to this. Another interesting thing to point out is the theory that the leader of the X-Hunters, Surges, is actually Dr. Wily in some form or another. In the Japanese version of the game, he references Dr. Light, calls X Mega Man, and has an intimate understanding of how to rebuild Zero. Weirdly, all these references were completely omitted from the English version of the game. I always thought it was a fascinatingly bizarre choice to take the main antagonist from the original series and make him an unremarkable sub-boss in the X series who's killed off unceremoniously. Weird choice. X2 changes slightly depending on whether or not you've defeated the X-Hunters and acquired all of Zero's parts. If you got them all, Dr. Kane will revive Zero, and if you didn't, Sigma will revive Zero. The weird thing is that you don't really get anything for collecting all the Zero parts, other than not having to fight Zero, but this fight with Zero is awesome, and depriving the player of that doesn't really make a lot of sense. I mean, listen to this music, this is my jam. Technically, the reward for not fighting him is that you'll stand a better chance against the final boss. You see, Capcom thought it'd be cool to save the game before the Zero fight, and not after. So you have to fight Zero, then both of Sigma's forms, all without any health refills. It's absurd. Which brings me to my next point. This game is stupid hard. Compared to X1's challenging but fair difficulty, X2 just feels frustratingly cheap. Overdrive Ostrich does this unavoidable river dance football quarterback punting move that's impossible to duck under or jump over. The 3 X-Hunter bosses have attacks that are also completely unavoidable, and they don't really have any strong weaknesses. And while Sigma's wireframe form isn't too bad, his first form, where he gets freaking Wolverine claws, is patently unfair. His attack radius is basically half the screen, and it is simply not possible for a normal human being to dodge that. Also, why does Sigma keep getting all the cool weapons? Where's my lightsaber? Where's my Wolverine claws, huh? But it's not just the bosses, but the levels themselves that are badly designed and unfair. Magna Centipede's stage is a good contender for one of the most bullshit level designs because of these indestructible metal cubes that fall from the ceiling and instantly kill you, despite there being little to no warning when they'll come or from what direction. The Overdrive Ostrich level sucks too. It's a long stretch of desert that you're supposed to drive a bike through, but it explodes the moment it touches anything, meaning you'll have to run through giant stretches meant for a bike on foot. And while I'm complaining about stuff, there's too many bugs in this game. Magna Centipede, Morph Moth, Crystal Snail isn't really a bug but close enough. What happened to the badass Mavericks like Storm Eagle and Spark Mandrill, huh? Now I'm just fighting bugs.
One Spinator under attack! One Spinator engage enemy! One Spinator terrorize!
The secret Street Fighter move is back again, but this time it's the Shoryuken, and somehow it is even more convoluted than before to attain. And I guess that's my biggest gripe with this game. It's just a downgrade from the previous entry. Even little details from X1, like the stage changes depending on your boss order, are absent here. The world map does change after defeating a boss, so that's something, I guess. But it just goes to show that Capcom really didn't go the extra mile this time. And that's about all there is to say about X2. I know I've been hard on it, so I would like to mention how badass Flamestag's level is. You're climbing up an active volcano and avoiding enemies and lava while kick-ass rock music plays. It's a good time. and it makes up for some of the other bland levels like Bubble Crabs or Wheel Gators. Shosuge apparently hated the Flame Stag song and wanted to cut it, but he got major pushback from the rest of the staff because they could appreciate what good music sounds like. Overall, this game is just kind of a rushed, super unbalanced, and less creative version of what we already played in X1. Fortunately for us, X3 is a lot better.
X
この冬 X は進化するノンストップアクションロックマン X2 スーパーファミコンで発売中カプコン
Like Maverick Hunter X, I want to talk about Xtreme next because it's designed after the first X game, even though it came out way later. Released in the year 2000, Mega Man Xtreme was the first portable game in the series. It was more or less a hodgepodge of the first two games, but shrunk down to fit on the Game Boy Color. There's a very simple story to justify retreading areas we've already been. Set sometime after X2, a group of cyber terrorists called the Shadow Hunters hack into the Maverick Hunter's mother computer and revive old Maverick bosses as digital data. So X has to go into the computer and defeat them again digitally. I don't really understand how they're a threat in digital form. I mean, were their Maverick souls going to be transferred to physical bodies or something? It's like, who cares? Just leave them in the computer. Strangely, half the game is portioned off depending on the difficulty. Normal and hard mode each feature 4 separate stages and bosses, which is a weird choice. In normal mode, you'll fight Chill Penguin, Spark Mandrill, Storm Eagle, and Flame Stag. In hard mode, it's Wheel Gator, Magna Centipede, Armored Armadillo, and Morph Moth. Mega Man Xtreme has a pretty sloppy translation, with a lot of English and or bad writing in general, but of course, you're not playing a portable Mega Man game for the story, are you? After X defeats all the Mavericks again, he faces off against the Shadow Hunters, who, of course, are working for Sigma. After defeating one of the Shadow Hunters, Techno, your operator, MIDI, is like, "We're brothers, we share the same CPU, so I guess I'm dying too. Goodbye." And it's like, okay, I forgot you were a character, go ahead and die, lol. The game ends with X conveying Midi's death to Zero, and the two of them lamenting a world where the strong have to sacrifice the weak to survive, and X vowing to change the world for the better. Then after the credits, Midi is just magically alive, like, "Hey yo, what's up, it's your boy Midi, here to tell you about hard mode." Interestingly, Xtreme came out a year before the premiere of the Battle Network series, and I'd like to believe that the idea of Mega Man fighting bosses in the cyber realm originated from this game. Although it probably didn't. As far as the gameplay goes, it's not bad, but it's not great either. I mean, it's a Game Boy Color game. But you also have to put yourself into the shoes of the player back then. We could play anything on portable now, but that wasn't always the case. So, getting to play an X game portably was pretty dang cool. With the release of the Sony PlayStation and the Sega Saturn, LOL, Capcom decided that they didn't want to personally put that much time into an X game on the SNES, so they actually outsourced the game. I know, I was shocked too to learn this. Like going to Disneyland and discovering that underneath Goofy's head was not a burnt-out, chain-smoking 40-year-old divorcee, but rather an entire hive of angry bees. Disappointing, right? So X3 was made by Minakuchi Engineering, who had previously developed the Game Boy ports of the original Mega Man games. Released in 1995 in Japan and 96 in the US, Mega Man X3 starts with a scientist named Dr. Doppler installing Norton antivirus on all the reploids, which prevents them from going berserk. He's lauded as a hero, but it's not long before Sigma possesses Doppler's mind and makes him and his reformed Mavericks wage war on X and Zero.
Well, well, well. How the turntables...
X3 had a lot of unique things going for it. The biggest thing was that for the first time, it let players take control of our favorite red-suited, tighty-whitey wearing reploid. You play as him in the opening stage after X is bamboozled by his friend Mac, who decided to go Maverick. I like how everyone has cool names like X and Zero and Sigma, and then there's just Mac. A playable Zero would become the norm for the remainder of the series, but at the time, it was an incredible feature. You better believe I begged my mom on a weekly basis to let me rent this game from Blockbuster Video so I could play as Zero one more time. How you choose him isn't entirely straightforward though. Once in a level, you could go to the pause menu and then select him from there. Zero is stronger, faster, jumps higher, and is a more generous lover. But there's some caveats. You can't play as him once you reach a mini-boss, and the game makes sure to put mini-bosses in every level now for that specific reason, meaning you can only ever play as Zero for less than half of each level. He also can't collect heart canisters or sub-tanks, so if you find one, you'll have to go back to being X so you can grab it. And worst of all, Zero only has one life, so once he dies, he's literally out of the game forever. Fortunately, a lot of these issues were fixed in the fan-made Zero project. The intent of the game, I'm sure, is to give you enough Zero to tantalize you, but honestly, the restrictions are so limiting that it's almost easier to just not bother playing with him at all. X3 was a huge milestone in the series, as it was the first game to not exclusively appear on the Super Nintendo. It was also released on the PS1, the PC, and the Sega Saturn. You might assume that the non-SNES versions would be superior, as they include uncompressed audio, FMV cutscenes, including an animated title sequence, and some other enhancements. However, the quality of the cutscenes and the remixed music is questionable. Capcom made the baffling decision to release X3 in January, missing the holiday market entirely. It was also being sold for a higher price than similar games due to the extra costs associated with the CX4 chip. It also didn't help that there was a chip shortage at the time, which made it harder for Nintendo to meet orders. Also, the game was released towards the end of the Super Nintendo's life cycle, with the N64 less than a year away.
Oh, is that enough? Should I keep going?
All these factors combined pretty much doomed the sales for the game. Ironically, that inflated the price we have to pay for the game now. Less copies sold meant less copies made, which means now there's demand but limited supply. So expect to see these carts on eBay for like $300+, making it the most expensive resold Mega Man game that I'm aware of. The Sega Saturn has a different arrangement of the soundtrack than the SNES version. I honestly am not sure which I like better. You be the judge. One thing that makes X3 superior to 2 is that the bosses are actually cool again. You've got your Tunnel Rhino, you've got your Toxic Seahorse, you've got your Blast Hornet. Need I go on? I thought I'd also mention the original Japanese names for these Mavericks because I think they're hilarious. Blizzard Buffalo was originally Frozen Buffaleo, Neon Tiger was Shining Tigered, and Crushed Crawfish was originally Scissors Shrimper. Nothing quite fills the player with dread and anticipation like a battle against Scissors Shrimper. The stage designs are arguably better than X2, with some unique challenges that make them pretty memorable. My only gripe with them is the insistence of breaking up the action with too many sub-bosses, some of which appear randomly, so more often than not, you'll just have to enter these empty rooms, and it's literally a waste of time and is pointless. Speaking of which, Bit and Bite are the new enemies that fill the role of the X-Hunters from the previous game. They're not particularly hard, and don't progress the story in any way at all, but I guess it's cool that they're included? Vile also makes his return here because, you know, why not? He starts with his ride armor, then fights you on foot once that's destroyed. I gotta say, it's pretty satisfying seeing X being able to defeat Vile for the first time without Zero's help. It feels like character growth. Speaking of ride armor, X3 added these ride armor platforms throughout the 8 stages, allowing you to access ride armor in a variety of different versions. The only problem is the way you're supposed to unlock these things isn't very clear. You need to unlock the default version of it before you can get the variants, and the default version requires that you have a certain weapon used on a stage that likely won't be the first you go to because of the difficulty. Basically, by the time you naturally figure out how to unlock these armors, you'll be pretty far into the game already. To add to the futility, the ride armor sections are incredibly short, and you don't even need the armor to proceed, so unless you're going for a 100% completion, they're kind of a waste of time. The upgrades in X3 are way more convoluted too. Many of them are dependent on having other upgrades or weapons to reach them. There's also enhancement ships that are like super upgrades, but they require you to have specific armor upgrades first, or you can't activate them. Basically, there's a ton of backtracking involved in collecting all the items in this game, and X3 does absolutely nothing to indicate to you which order to play the levels in, or what upgrade you'll need to complete a challenge. And honestly, that's the biggest issue with this game as a whole. The ride armor is cool, the extra bosses are cool, the upgraded armor and enhancements are cool, but they're such a complicated pain in the ass to get that they are not worth the effort. Take the ultimate upgrade, for example. X could get Zero's Z-Blade as a permanent weapon, but first you need to defeat Vile using a specific weapon, then fight a sub-boss in one of the final stages using Zero. Considering Zero can't fight any other boss in the game, the player would have absolutely no reason to think that this boss would be different and probably wouldn't bother using Zero here. But then again, to get the Hadouken, you had to jump into the Grand Canyon 3 times, so I guess this is a slightly less ridiculous expectation of the player. The special weapons in X3 are the Acid Burst, the Frost Shield, the Energy Well, the Parasitic Bomb, the Ray Splasher, the Spinning Blade, the Tornado Fang, and the Triad Thunder. Like X1 and X2 before it, these weapons are hit or miss. The spinning blades are interesting to mess around with, and the charged version of it creates a spinning death yo-yo that's freaking awesome. But overall, it feels like the damage of the special weapons was reduced even further for X3, making a lot of them redundant. This gravity well ain't useful for shit. The music in X3 is also hit or miss in my opinion. The soundtrack was also outsourced, so it doesn't sound quite like the other X games. Honestly, a lot of the stages had songs I hated, like Tunnel Rhinos and Blast Hornets. But I loved Gravity Beetle's song, so there's definitely some bangers to be had. Despite reusing a lot of the same sprites and whatnot from the first 2 games, I'd say Mega Man X3 definitely looks the best. You can see a lot more attention to detail with the parallaxing backgrounds, for example. Probably not the biggest improvement in the world, but still an improvement nonetheless. The game ends with another fight against Resurrected Sigma. This time he's in a giant mech suit called Kaiser Sigma. This fight is probably the hardest battle in any of the Mega Man X games, and the peak of Sigma's power in the series. I mean, look how big that body is and how tiny that head is. Your head's tiny, bro! After beating Kaiser Sigma, Dr. Doppler, no longer under Maverick influence, kamikazes himself, taking out both himself and Virus Sigma via heroic sacrifice. There's a general consensus that X3 is one of the harder X games, but I didn't really feel that way at all. I thought this one was way easier and way more fair than X2. Overall, I really liked X3. The stages and bosses are cool, and playable Zero is great. Some redundancies and tedious backtracking keep it from reaching greatness though. Also, this enemy is everywhere. If I never had to see this little f***er again, I'd be perfectly happy.
アクションゲームで大好評のロックマン X シリーズがついに32ビット機に登場。ロックマン X3 定評の爽快感あるアクションに今度はなんとアニメ
You know the drill, it's another Game Boy D-make, this time featuring bosses from Mega Man X1 through 3. All around the world, the souls of Reploids are leaving their bodies and disappearing. It's called the Erasure, but they might as well just have called it the Robot Rapture. Should have repented to Robot Jesus, you heathens.
We believe he was built and that he was a very well-programmed robot, but he wasn't our messiah.
X and Zero are sent to investigate the mysterious Laguz Island, believing it to have clues that'll shed some light on the erasure phenomena. Aiding them is a young Iris, who is introduced to them since this game takes place before X4. Capcom illustrator Haruki Tsutsugo said Iris was specifically put into this game so her character would have a second chance for some levity, as her story in X4 was pretty tragic, and even all the illustrations for her in X4 made her seem so sorrowful. On the island, they meet a night-themed Reploid named Gareth, who tells them that they must defeat 8 Mavericks before he'll talk to them about the erasure. So, once again, you'll be fighting Neon Tiger, Launch Octopus, Flame Mammoth, Volt Catfish, Blast Hornet, Tunnel Rhino, Wire Sponge, and Overdrive Ostrich. Xtreme 2 takes on a few extra features not present in the previous title, like being able to play as Zero, or being able to get upgrades from Iris. Interestingly, the idea of Reploids having souls is a concept that would get carried over into the Mega Man Zero series as Cyber Elves. After defeating the 8 Mavericks, X and Zero split up. Zero fights and defeats Gareth, and X fights and defeats Burkana, Gareth's master. To no one's surprise, Gareth and Burkana were behind it all, stealing Reploid souls and using them to make themselves stronger. And also to no one's surprise, Sigma was the mastermind of this whole plot, even though it adds nothing to include that. Like Mega Man Xtreme before it, Xtreme 2 is a fun, if not kinda redundant game if you've already played the other mainline games. But if you ever felt like playing a downgraded version of a SNES game, you could certainly do worse. Well, we finally made it past the Nintendo era and into the PlayStation games. I didn't grow up with any of these games, as I never owned an original PS1, so everything from this point forward is new territory for me. Mega Man X4 was released in 1997 on the PlayStation 1 and the Sega Saturn. There's practically no difference between the two, except I think the compression is worse on the Saturn, so there's more pixelation. But the Saturn does exclusively have a sweet-ass heat shimmer effect, so if the distortion you see from a hot surface as light refracts between the hot and cool air above it, creating a blurry haze, is your jam, then the Saturn version is for you. Talking about that heat shimmer... Originally, the Mega Man team had no plans to make a sequel past 3. I mean, Dr. Doppler injecting an antivirus directly into the virus form of Sigma seems pretty conclusive, right? But the higher-ups at Capcom wanted to see what they could do with an X game on upgraded hardware, and thus, X4 was kicked into production. The development team ran into a few issues, like squeezing all the assets onto one disc. This was especially a problem in regards to the stages being too big, so the solution was to cut each stage in half, so they all have a Part 1 and a Part 2. It also took Capcom a long time to get the game approved for North American localization. Apparently, Sony had some strict rules about 2D games on their fancy new PS1, and at the time, anything less than 3D was considered outdated. Of course, they'd eventually abandon their weird, art-style gatekeeping policy, but nevertheless, Capcom really had to convince Sony that 2D games could still be relevant. I mean, come on guys, it may still be 2D, but it's no longer 16 bits, it's 32 bits now. That's twice as many bits! X4 begins with a terrorist attack on the floating city of Sky Lagoon. Someone hijacked the city's floating technology, I guess, and it's on course to crash into the ground. At the scene of the crime is a Maverick Hunter called Magma Dragoon, who is like, "Oh, I'm just checking things out. Well, gotta go. Nothing suspicious about me being here. Bye." Right after he leaves, Sky Lagoon crashes, leading to countless deaths.
I threw it on the ground!
If you're playing as Zero, he'll search the ruins for Iris, who I guess is his girlfriend, but it's not really explained. They're approached by the Colonel of the Repliforce army, creatively named Colonel. Repliforce is a group of Reploids and Maverick Hunters that want to build an independent nation separate from humans. X and Zero demand that the Colonel come in for questioning, but he refuses out of pride. This causes the Maverick Hunters to lay blame for the Sky Lagoon attack on the Repliforce, which is quite an assumption on their part, but okay. One thing I thought was hilarious is that in the instruction manual for X4, Colonel is described as treating his troops the same way he treats his sister, with respect. But then literally the first time we see him in the game, he abandons his injured sister so he could go argue with Zero some more. I want to also point out the fact that the hundreds of thousands of people that were killed in the prologue is a plot point that has very little emotional weight to it. Sure, it kicks off the events of the story, but because we never see a single human being in the game, it's hard to take that tragedy seriously. X4 would begin the lineage of the X series dealing with some really grim and heavy topics, like, for example, the end of the world, but none of it even seems to matter at all because we never see or hear from any random humans in the series, not even once.
Not once!
I mean, what is X fighting for? To save humanity? The only human that ever appears, to my knowledge, is Dr. Kane in X2 and X3, and he's the reason all this is happening to begin with, so I don't really care if he dies. I guess my point of all this is that when Sky Lagoon crashes, we're told that thousands died, but really it feels more like, no, it didn't. The place was deserted before and after. Knowing that they'll be considered enemies anyways, the Repliforce decides to make the first move and declare their independence from humanity. This kicks off the Repliforce uprising and the player fighting the 8 bosses. All things considered, I do really like the new boss designs. We're finally straying away from freaking Bugtown and steering back towards cool Mavericks again, like Slash Beast, or Magma Dragoon, or Split Mushroom. Okay, they can't all be winners. Split Mushroom just sounds like a soup you'd eat in the fall. It's making me hungry. The loading screens for the bosses are my favorite so far too. They have these full sentence descriptions to hype up the boss, but it's simultaneously too much information and too little information. He occupies the laboratory and will attack whoever visits there. He destroyed the city and escaped to the sea. I love how these intros just read like some rage bait YouTube headline. He lives in cyberspace and wants to destroy the network system, but he got caught. The bread and butter of these X games are the stages themselves, and I gotta say, these are my favorite since the first game. There's a lot of fun and creativity here. I especially liked Web Spider's stage. I love a good jump from log to log on a waterfall challenge. This entire level has you riding a jet ski. It's not well executed, but at least they took a swing, you know? And how about this platform section on Split Mushroom stage where these robotic plant dicks burst out of the wall? That's different. The updated PS1 graphics and art style look great, and allow for a lot more depth and detail in the background. Seeing Chill Penguin and Blizzard Buffalo frozen in Walrus as stage is a nice touch. Apparently in the manga series, Walrus just straight up murders Buffalo. He sure seems a lot more ruthless for what it turns out is a complete joke of a boss fight. I also want to praise the soundtrack while I'm on a positivity bender. I think this entry has easily the best OST behind the first game. The PS1's advanced sound chip allowed for richer tunes than the SNES could produce, and X4 takes full advantage of it with these freaking bangers. Of course, the biggest change in X4 besides the complete graphical overhaul is that now you can choose to play the entire game as X or Zero. X plays as he always has, but Zero is completely different. Rather than acquiring the boss's weapons in each stage, Zero will just get an extra move that increases his general playability, like being able to do an air dash or an uppercut, that sort of thing. Zero definitely plays different than X, and it can take some getting used to, but his gameplay ends up being just as satisfying, if not more so. A lot of Zero's moves are inspired by Street Fighter, and that was the developer's way of differentiating Zero and X's gameplay in a way that would placate the higher-ups at Capcom. Hey, you guys like Street Fighter, right? Of course you do. Sign off on all these changes, please. This may seem silly, but I could tell you working for employers before that would flip out if you changed a font. This is absolutely the kind of dumb shit you need to do to get things approved. There's also some small story differences. As Zero, you'll fight Iris, and as X, you'll fight Double, a rookie Maverick Hunter ally who ends up being a double agent. Who would have guessed? I think the name is also supposed to be a fat-shaming joke, but who knows. In the instruction manual, it specifically says that Dr. Kane created Double, which makes this like the 100th time one individual was responsible for creating a weapon of mass destruction. Can we please defund Kane Labs and arrest this man already? The special weapons / moves you'll be getting moving forward is doubled, as a playable Zero becomes a staple for the remainder of the series. For X, he'll get the Frost Tower, the Ground Hunter, the Twin Slasher, the Lightning Web, the Soul Body, the Aiming Laser, the Double Cyclone, and the Rising Fire. While a lot of these weapons are kinda predictable, I will give props to the Soul Body for creativity. This weapon creates a clone of X that follows him around and damages enemies.
I love finding a good set of twins.
Zero works a little different. He doesn't get weapons from the Maverick bosses, but instead gets new moves he could perform with his Z-Saber. Strangely, his moves retain their Japanese names, but I'm not going to embarrass myself to try to pronounce them, so I'll just list them on the screen. But they include the Ice Stab, the Thunder God Attack, the Sky Waltz, the Flying Jump, the Hurricane Fang, the Dragon Flame Blade, the Sky Command, and the Fallen Phoenix Crush. With the exception of the last one, none of these moves consume any energy, and rather act as an evolution of Zero's moveset. I always really liked this idea, and feel like this is how Mega Man's secondary weapons should have always behaved, but that's just me. X's ultimate armor looks pretty sick, and ended up being a fan favorite. The developers famously had a real difficult time designing the armor and getting it just right. Zero doesn't get any armor upgrades, and it seems likely that it's because too much time was spent on X's armor, and the team just ran out of time. Inafune was also pretty possessive of his designs for Zero, and it could just be that he didn't want his look to change. I think either reason is plausible, but either way, sorry Zero, no sick-ass armor for you. If you're playing as Zero, you'll eventually fight and kill Colonel. This will enrage Iris, and she'll fight to avenge her brother. Her ultimate form is like this bat mech for some reason. Zero has no choice but to kill her, and there's a whole scene where he's mourning her. This is a pretty good example of how rushed the storytelling is in X4. We barely got introduced to her at the beginning of the game, and it absolutely does not go into detail at all about her and Zero's relationship. Were they dating? Were they robo-f***ing? They obviously had something together, but the game doesn't bother to explain it at all. It's funny that a game with FMV cutscenes somehow tells a less cohesive story than its Super Nintendo predecessors. And that brings us to the voice acting. Save for only Mega Man 8, which I'm pretty sure was done intentionally bad as a prank.
Mega Man, today we finish this!
Hey, Zach! Why must I fight you? We are not enemies!
Shut up! We have purposely trained him wrong, as a joke.
Mega Man X4 probably has the worst voice acting in all of gamedom. The grunts and yells from X and Zero during gameplay is actually a great flourish, but everything in the cutscenes is a whole different matter.
I'll take care of this personally.
By yourself, Commander?
I don't want any more of my people being sacrificed.
Iris! Iris! Ah! No, this isn't happening! There's no reason for me to go on. What? What am I fighting for?
And yes, I loved this scene so much that I decided to make it part of my intro. Not that the bar was particularly high for video game voice acting in the 90s, but damn girl, that's stanky. Fortunately, Zero's voice actor for Maverick Hunter X, Lucas Gilbertson, who to be clear, was not the original voice, redubbed a few of the scenes from X4 and made them sound a lot better.
This isn't happening! There's no reason for me to go on! What am I fighting for?
I mean, it's not like the dub made it into any of the re-releases of the game or anything, but hey, at least the scenes don't suck so bad now. While Zero's original voice is bad, X's voice just doesn't sound right at all. X's voice actor, Ruth Marie Jarman, also voiced the titular character in Mega Man 8. Rumor is that she recorded her lines for both games in the same session, and she wasn't told that they'd be for separate characters. Thus, X's voice was recorded to sound like Little Boy Mega Man by mistake.
Dr. Light, how's it going? Will he be okay? What if I become one of the Mavericks?
Since we're talking about the game's issues, another one is the wild imbalance of difficulty. The stages are actually really easy, but the bosses can range from an absolute joke, like this giant walrus that you just have to gently hop over, to this freaking peacock that wipes out half your health with a standard attack. The boss fights are also not particularly well done this time around, as they only really have like 2 moves that they'll just keep spamming. They have even less attack variety than their SNES counterparts, which just seems lazy to me. After defeating all the Maverick bosses, you'll have to defeat Sigma, who of course was pulling the strings all along. using Magma Dragoon to destroy Sky Lagoon and pit the Repliforce and Maverick Hunters against each other. Sigma is waiting in the Repliforce's space station, which is also a giant laser. And also it's the utopian city that the Repliforce was trying to build to get away from the humans. X4's story is just sprinting towards the finish line at this point. We do get some great hastily made typos though. Repliforce has left for the space. The final stages are really short and it doesn't seem like much effort was put into them. You'll have to fight the Repliforce General, creatively named General. Colonel, General, did the writing staff for this one just give up? Did you guys go too deep down the animal-themed Maverick rabbit hole that you forgot how to name humanoid characters or something? And who thought it was a good idea to build the freaking Iron Giant over here anyways? This dude is massive. Why would a robot that large even be created in a world where like every other robot goes berserk? That's just asking for trouble. You'll eventually fight Sigma, which... what the f***? What is this design? Did they melt his face in the microwave? This is horrifying. The story kind of abruptly ends after that, with the General sacrificing his body to destroy the giant laser so Sigma can't use it to attack Earth. The end credits start rolling here, and even the text wants to wrap this shit up as fast as possible. I'm not fast forwarding this clip, the credits really do scroll this fast. The battle has ended, but for some reason, Zero's memories of the past continue to haunt his mind. As a hunter, it is his duty to go after those Mavericks, and at the same time, he knows that it is his destiny to defeat his friend one day. Two different people, two different fates. In the future, Zero's decision will lead to great hunters Anyways, that's Mega Man X4. The game is a bit linear, especially for Zero as he doesn't get any upgrades or parts to find. Some of the bosses are way too difficult or way too easy, and the voice acting is a war crime.
My fate is sealed. I have no choice.
Hey, watch it! I'm terribly sorry. What a freak.
You want some? Huh? Then keep your mouth shut.
Bro, savage.
But the graphics are a huge leap up from the Super Nintendo. Being able to play as Zero is awesome, and the world of this game is a lot more creative and fun than the previous two games. I know I've been hard on this one, but even its flaws are enjoyably bad, and never frustratingly bad, like in the later entries. Truthfully, this is probably my second favorite game in the series, behind the original Mega Man X.
X のパワーかゼロの技か俺は一体何のために戦っているんだ。選べるヒーローは一人じゃない。ロックマン X4 好評発売中。Capcom.
I titled this video The Rise of Mega Man X because the first four games, to me at least, represent the best and most promising years of the X series, and when the series was at its most popular and relevant in the video game landscape. So naturally, I'm sure you could figure out what my upcoming Part 2 video will be about. Not to say that X1 through 4 is a linear line upwards, I actually liked X5 more than X2 and 3, but I think it's fair to say that X5 was the beginning of the end of the series. If you like this video, hey, how about you hit the like button and then go subscribe to my channel. I've got other Mega Man videos you could check out, and plenty of other long-form retrospective videos as well. If you really like this video, go check out my Patreon, or join as a YouTube member to watch the super version of this video. Supers are like extra long director's cuts, and an extra bonus for viewers that want to support me. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon for Part 2.